Hi, welcome to episode 89 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we all live in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Michael Gulotta, who lives about 1,100 miles southwest of me in New Orleans, Louisiana, where he was born and raised as the chef partner of an acclaimed inventive group of restaurants. We were connected by Vishwesh Bhatt, who was a guest of episode 77. So thank you to Vishwesh for connecting us, and thank you, Michael, for joining me today. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
I'm doing well. I will be honest. It's a little chaotic down here in New Orleans today because how it always is this time of year. This is our busiest time for hurricane season, and it's crazy. In the past couple of years, the storms are very erratic. So usually we used to have like these long tracks out where it's like, okay, it's probably going to hit us in like 3 days, and nowadays it's like, okay, this one popped up and it's going to hit tomorrow, and you're like, oh my god. So then suddenly it's a lot of running around, and all the gas stations are clogged with people trying to get gas, and all the stores get emptied out. And because with this sort of with climate change, they rapidly intensify way faster than they used to. So it used to be sort of this very predictable. The meteorologists used to be able to predict much further out, and they would be able to predict what intensity it would be hitting you with. And nowadays they intensify very rapidly. So they're like, okay, this could hit as a 2 or a 3 all of a sudden. And a 2 is cause for concern. A 3 is like serious cause for concern. But this one should only be a 2. So I don't know. I've been here so long. I was born and raised here. I've been sitting through category 1s and 2s my whole life, so they don't really bother me. I've sat through a few 3s, and those can get a little hairy. I've never had to sit through a 4, which I've heard can be pretty scary. So, yeah. So that's my day to day.
So I mean, what was it? I mean, like, I guess we've been hit. We periodically get hit by a hurricane here, and the last one that hit was actually like our neighborhood was spared, but there was some massive flooding, and to the north of us in an area called Dumbo, and to the south in an area called Red Hook. But just do people take them? Are people more? Less freaked out by them, or is it because of like the recent history with like Katrina where people get actually really freaked out by it?
I think it's a little bit of, I don't know. It's weird because I think what it is now. Ugh, I feel like I don't get freaked out as much, but I feel like a lot of people now do, just because there has been a lot of issues, and like I said, the storms rapidly intensify now, and so you may think it's not going to be a big deal, and all of a sudden it is a big deal. Like, I sat through Ida, I think that was 3 years ago, and didn't seem like it was going to be that bad of a hurricane, and it's the kind I typically would ride out, and then it was going to hit as a 2, and we're like, okay, a 2's fine, and all of a sudden it was like a direct hit at a 3, and you're like, oh, okay, a 3's kind of rough, man. And the wind got scary, and it wasn't even. And it was a lot of tree damage, a lot of house damage, and then the crazy thing is that a whole transition tower by our local energy company broke in half and fell into the river, and so the city was out of power for 2 weeks. And it's like, that's when shit really goes downhill. when it's like, okay, we're out of power for 2 weeks, and so like the restaurants are closed. We lost all of our product. We gave a lot of our product away to other people. Like, I gave a bunch of my product away to Isaac Toops, who's another chef in town, and because he has a generator and he used it to feed people. And it's like, we actually set up a store on our deck and just let locals come take all the food just so they had something to eat for 2 weeks. So I mean, it's like, it's crazy. It's just like, okay, whatever, man.
Now, is it most vulnerable when you're close to the water, or is like New Orleans like close to the coast, or is it such that like every place in New Orleans is close to some kind of water? So,
I mean, it's a hurricane. So no matter where I mean, if it's going to hit you, and especially if you're on the eastern side of the storm, these are all things you learn when you live down here. If you're on the eastern side of the storm and it's coming in off the water, then you're in a bad spot because that's where the strongest winds are. And nowadays, we've lost a lot of our swamplands to saltwater intrusion because of the oil companies would dig their pipelines through the marshes, and so saltwater intrusion has eaten up all of our marshland. And so now there's not as much, and that marshland used to slow the storms down and take some of the power out of them, but now there's really not a lot between New Orleans and the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
It's like the Gulf of Mexico is eerily close to New Orleans. It's like right outside our door now, and so these
Mhm.
hurricanes basically hit us at full strength.
Oh wow.
Plus, the water is warmer, so they hit stronger. And so, like I said, it's that rapid intensification that we didn't have when I was younger, where something that was literally just a little disturbance 3 days ago is now a Category 2 hurricane. You're like, oh man, that's okay. Well, I wasn't ready for that. And so then people get freaked out and they scramble around because you don't know if it might intensify to a 3
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
4. And if it's a 4, then you're stuck here and you weren't ready. And that's when things get tricky.
All right. Wow. Um, I guess so. I guess when people hear the word New Orleans, they can think about hurricanes. They also think about food. You're obviously in the restaurant industry. Is it something that you always knew that you wanted to get involved with?
Yeah, yeah. I'm one of those lucky people that I've always wanted to be in the restaurant industry for as long as I can remember. I've always been just mystified by really great service and really great cuisine. And I guess growing up here, I got the chance to go to a bunch of really nice restaurants when I was younger. Not a whole lot, um, but I got to go to places and experience and it really is true. When people visit here, they're like, "Oh my god, like everything here tastes good." And it's one of those situations where, like, we fall into the trap of a lot of New Orleans cuisine is the same because we have our own cuisine. So it's we used to have we actually after Katrina, I forgot who it was, a food writer from New York gave us a really kind of scathing review. It was like 1,000 different restaurants with the same menu, and that was kind of the way post Katrina, like right after Katrina, you had all these restaurants that were basically just serving the same food, but it all tastes really good. Like New Orleanians are really good at hitting every part of the flavor palette. Almost like two of my restaurants are influenced by Southeast Asian cuisine, and Southeast Asian cuisine is the same way. They have the ethos of hot, sour, salty, sweet. It hits all the areas of the palate, and New Orleans cuisine does the same thing. Like it's flavored very aggressively,
Yeah.
and it's with lots of balance. We season with hot sauce, we season with salt, we season so it does all the same things with that hot, sour, salty, sweet. And if you didn't grow up with that and you come to New Orleans, you're like, wow, everything just tastes really good because we are aggressive with our seasoning. And now since then, there's been a boom of other styles of restaurants. I mean, MoPho opened 10 years ago. At the time, it was way ahead of its time. I mean, fusing New Orleans and Southeast Asian cuisine and really finding these natural pathways. We always said at MoPho and Maypop, we're always thinking, like, when we think about cuisine, we're always thinking, what would a third or fourth generation Vietnamese New Orleanian cook for their spouse who's from Lafayette? Like, what would they cook for them that is this natural melding? And so, like, we would make, what really is the difference between an etouffee or a shrimp creole and a shrimp curry? Like, how different are they? And so I'd make a shrimp creole, but instead of butter and cream, I would use coconut milk, and I would add ginger and add lemongrass, and season it with fish sauce. Whereas, like, a lot of people down here season it with Liam Perrin's, Worcestershire. Like, how different
Mhm.
is Worcestershire from fish sauce? They're both made with
Yeah.
anchovies, so you have all these parallels, and so you end up with something that is recognizable to the South Louisiana palate, but it's also something new and different. And that really was what skyrocketed MoPho, to winning all the national awards and everything. People were like, "Oh, I see where you're coming from, but it's something entirely different."
Yeah. Wow, exciting, I guess, to be a part of that evolution. Because what do you, and I'll say, like, for like New York, the reason why I would think New York has the rich culinary scene that it has. It's just one, there's just so many people. Two, there's so many different immigrants that'll come here to start, and I guess three, there's like the finance industries here, so there's just a lot of money that can
Right.
go into either investing in these things or in just kind of patronizing them. What would you say is the reason why New Orleans is such a culinary hub? Like, what is it about its history or the culture or?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I think New Orleans has all the things that New York has, except for the finance, and that really is the big thing about New Orleans is like we're kind of stuck in a certain. We've always got ourselves sort of trapped in a certain bubble because I watch my friends who have really great restaurants in New York, and man, they really can push the envelope there. Whereas we can't really push envelopes in New Orleans. We don't have that massive amount of money coming through where we can, where we can test out really awesome things. Where New York's like a pressure cooker where like there's so many people trying to make it there that it hyper evolves the food very very quickly. Um, and you have people that just buy into that, and so they want to try these new things, and so you can have this massive evolution of cuisine, which is beautiful, And in New Orleans, I always say the difference is that New Orleans was settled by the French, and that's the big difference between New Orleans and New York, right? New York's a little bit more what's the word that I'm thinking of? Anywho, New Orleans has that laissez-faire. It's a little bit more relaxed. It's a little bit more about partying. It's a little bit more about people. It really is, and I see people come down here and try to open restaurants that are from New York, and they're like, "Dude, I've never seen people not want to work hard." But people in New Orleans do not work hard. They just don't. It's just
Is that because of the heat and humidity?
I mean, it's the heat, it's the humidity, but it truly is like we were settled by the French, and the French are it's just a very laid back party. Let's go drink all day. Like it really that culture has just stayed here. It never grew past that. And
Right.
you hear it all because like it's funny because of being in the restaurant industry, most of the people that work for me are not from New Orleans. And the people I hang out with mostly are not from New Orleans, and they're like, "Man, I came down here, and all I do is just show up for my." It's like people that aren't even in the restaurant industry that I'm friends with are like, "I moved down here." Like one guy's from Maryland, he's like, "I do the bare minimum, and I've gotten like 3 promotions." He's like, New Orleanians just don't work, and it's true. Like we're just not very hard workers down here. And so it is definitely a cultural thing. Like you'll hire someone and they might show up for 2 shifts. And they're like, you know what? I don't really want to come back to work today. And you're like, okay. And they don't, so I kind of forgot where this part of the conversation started.
We were talking about the cultural, I guess, setting for why New Orleans is such a culinary hotbed.
Right. And then but I think just like New York, it is a port city.
Yeah.
So you have all of these cultures acting, not quite as many as New York, though.
Right.
We don't have Ellis Island. We just had literally the port of New Orleans. So for us, it was a lot of people just sneaking off of boats. It was a lot of people. It was back in the day, it was all Sicilian. Like my family's Sicilian.
Okay.
So it was a lot of Sicilians jumping off the boats before they actually got to the port and just climbing out of the water and running into the French Quarter to settle. And there was a lot of Irish immigrants. I'm also part Irish, so it's a lot of Sicilian, a lot of Irish, and then later on it was a lot of Hondurans because of the banana trade. So a lot of we were the biggest importer of bananas, so a lot of Hondurans were just jumping off the boats, and we have a huge Honduran population. And then the Vietnamese because we're Catholic. Honestly, it's
really?
we're French. We were a French Catholic colony, and so is Vietnam. So during the war, after the Vietnamese after the Vietnam War. Catholic priests were going in on missions and bringing back all the Vietnamese because they were also Catholic. And so we have a huge Vietnamese population here as well. So we do have this melting pot, but it's a little more focused. Whereas like everyone came into New York where you have Korean, you have Chinatown, you have all these, so many people crammed into one island. Yeah. Whereas with New Orleans, it's a little more focused. Like it was only certain groups that made it to New Orleans.
Yeah.
Like now you're starting to. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Like now you're starting to see a few more cultures, gaining footing. but for the longest time, it was like the same ones. It was, of course, a lot of African American influence from the slave trade. So, like red beans and rice is a Monday thing here in New Orleans. Every Monday we eat red beans and rice. That's not French, man. Beans and rice is not French. That's African. Gumbo, they always say gumbo is a Cajun dish. Gumbo, the word gumbo is an African word. It's the word for okra, and because traditionally the gumbo is thickened with the okra, and the French are the ones that introduced the roux to it and started calling the stew gumbo, but that's all the African influence. So like the biggest basis isn't actually French, it's African. And
Okay.
then on top of that, the French the French kind of put their uh, fingers into it because all the slaves worked for French aristocracy. So
Mhm.
that's sort of where the Creole comes from. And that's a big thing that people don't understand is like Cajun cuisine is actually from the Acadian French who settled along the bayous. It's all like trapper hunter food.
Uh-huh.
So that's like your etouffee. Like it's much darker and a lot more stick to your ribs heavy food. And then
Hmm.
the Creole cuisine was the French aristocracy who had black slaves or black housekeepers, and so they would cook African cuisine with a French tone, and so that's the Creole cuisine. And
Okay.
they're two very different cuisines. And so Creole is basically inner city New Orleans. Cajun is all of the countryside outside of New Orleans.
Interesting. I,
Yeah,
my I did a Gullah Geechee cooking class back
yeah,
in July in Charleston, and I imagine there's got to be some parallels between Creole and Gullah Geechee too. Then,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, so I guess like for you, and especially I guess in an environment where there are so many different cultures, and for you yourself, and this kind of came up, I guess, like in 2020, especially, but people came, I think, can be very sensitive about this, like the idea of like kind of cultural appropriation, and
Hmm.
like I get it, but I also think like one of the beauties of the United States is being able to kind of experiment with all these different cultures, but I can also see there could be a wrong way to do it. So as
Hmm.
you kind of you've succeeded with your restaurants while also incorporating other cuisines, is there something that you bear in mind when you do this stuff to kind of, you know,
Uh, man, and like I'll be on. I'm always brutally honest, and it's just
yeah,
back when I was hatching the idea for MoPho, the cultural appropriation thing wasn't that big yet.
yeah,
And it hadn't really hit the mainstream like it did. In the God, a lot of that happened, right before pandemic. I think where like cultural appropriation became a really big buzzword, and it is important. We should talk about it. I'm not
mhm,
saying like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'm not saying that. Like, it is a big
yeah,
deal. And I think the one thing that we always did right is that we never said we were doing like we never said like, oh, this is the way you have to do it, because like we never said like ours is the best. Like we just said no, this is food that we're inspired by, and we love like watching where it goes.
right,
We always just we used to call ourselves like a gateway drug. Like we're a gateway drug into Southeast Asian cuisine. Like we're doing a fusion. So if you've never had it before, like come try it here first, and then go get the real deal. Go get the real deal. At Tandin or Fotobai, which are like the classic places in New Orleans. And we even put on MoPho's website there is a link to restaurants that inspire us, and that link has like all the restaurants that inspire the dishes that are on MoPho's menu, because you know we understand that they're doing it the right way. Like what we're doing is just a fun mashup of the best parts that we love and the best parts of the New Orleans cuisine that we love, and we're putting them
right.
together.
Right. Well, it sounds like there's an element of respect and an element of understanding the base community maybe that you're becoming a part of and how you can help it. It kind of sounds like what you're referring to.
Absolutely, and I and I
Yeah.
and I try to do that. Although these days I feel like I'm just getting by with everything I'm doing. So
Yeah. Well, I married into a Taiwanese family, so like we kind of live that life of kind of like the mashup of the different cultures and histories. So it comes up, or at least it's always a part of every day.
no,
So
yeah. I mean, in my first marriage, I was married into a Honduran family, and that was uh, great food. And now my girlfriend of the last 2 years is Vietnamese, and I mean, I love them. I love they're just such high energy, positive people. And their family is just, it's just like, it's crazy how positive they all are. I don't know. I mean, like I said, once again, I come from this very laissez faire French, New Orleans, where we're just kind of like family's family and it's good, and you know, most of them are Catholic, but they never go to church, and it's just sort of this whatever kind of thing where it's like this, you know, this Vietnamese family that I'm now very close with is like they do everything with intention,
Yeah.
which is like wild to me because in New Orleans we kind of do everything with I don't know whatever feels good.
Uh, have you gone to Southeast Asia to to train? 'Cause I know
Not
you went to
really.
Italy
So
and Germany.
yeah, I trained in Italy and Germany because I always wanted to open an Italian restaurant, and then the world kind of took a left turn. You know, I found myself loving eating Southeast Asian cuisine because I found it was the one cuisine that tasted the most like New Orleans cuisine, and that whole story. I mean, so the whole idea was we were going to open like a little pho shop in mid city New Orleans and use that money to open like a higher end restaurant down the line. And I'm very bad at understanding the way I'm seen or where I am in the world. And so, like at the time, I was the chef de cuisine of one of the best restaurants in the country, but I didn't think anyone knew who I was. So, like, I'm like, oh, I'm leaving to go open this little spot in mid city, and all of a sudden, it was on like national lists of most anticipated restaurants, and I'm like, oh shit. So then we had to kind of like reverse engineer it into something that was a little more high end. Um, and then it just became this crazy ride. I mean, it's like I think back and I'm like, God, I was wholly unprepared to open a Southeast Asian meets New Orleans restaurant, and we made it all up on the fly, and it's still crazy to think of like how well known it became. It's just I don't know, but so I didn't end up going to Southeast Asia until after I opened Maypop. You know, my chef de
Mhm.
cuisine of MoPho and I traveled and because he goes there every year because his wife works with like reproductive health in Indonesia and in Laos. And so he's there every year, and so he's like, "Man, this year you should come with me." And so we set it all up, and we went and spent almost 2 weeks in Southeast Asia and just toured around. And that was eye opening for me because I came back and it greatly so like at that point I think MoPho had been open for 6 years and Maypop had been open for 3, and we came back and just totally revamped both menus. It just put so much new shine, so much new light onto the menus, and gave us so much more new ideas, and it really changed everything for the better. And I really wish I could do it again, but then pandemic hit, and everything's been in a tailspin since then.
Yeah. Where did you go in Southeast Asia?
It's funny we did not go to Vietnam. We went to um, Singapore, Laos, and Thailand.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I
Mhm.
think once you start going down the rabbit hole, it's like, where would you not go?
Right. So, but yeah, we only
uh,
had a certain number of days, and we did not make it to Vietnam. So I still need to go back. Although, like now, I'd like to go back with Paul, who's my chef de cuisine, but I'd also like to go back with my girlfriend because she was born there. So like, and she knows. Yeah. So either way.
we when I used to be a lawyer, and when I graduated from law school, the tradition is you take a post bar trip. So for my post bar trip, we did some deal where you could fly anywhere for like $1,000, and you could do this like for 20 days. So one of the places we went to was Hanoi, and that
Yeah.
was just one of the most like amazing and like surreal places I've ever been to. But as you were
Hmm.
talking about New Orleans, I feel, I mean, they're both very French influenced
Hmm.
cities, so you'd probably
Right.
feel at quite at home there.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's crazy the parallels, like I said, between being French colonies and both also French colonies and on river deltas and brackish water and shellfish and seafood. Like there's so many things that parallel um, that when we put those things together, it made perfect sense.
Yeah, and heat and humidity, and yeah,
And heat and humidity. Although when I got to Laos, man, I was like, I thought I'd be able to handle it growing up in New Orleans. I'm like, oh, I'm from New Orleans, I can handle heat and humidity. Laos was like on a whole nother level.
really,
And it's like Singapore wasn't that bad because you had kind of had that ocean breeze coming through,
yeah.
but like Laos up in the Delta was just like stagnant, heavy, humid heat. Like just
Oh,
the air just had weight to it.
oh
It was
wow.
just like, oh my god, yeah,
Oh, that's terrifying, because like when I was down in Charleston in July, that, I mean, the heat and humidity there is just like it's like being enveloped by like a duvet that's like hot and steamy. And
yeah,
if it gets worse in a place
yeah.
like
I mean,
Laos, I can't imagine.
New Orleans can be like that for sure.
Yeah. um. So, what would you say? Do you think there's any kind of like misperceptions or misconceptions about New Orleans that people have that you kind of feel like when you're out and about you have to kind of dispel?
Uh, I don't know, man. You know, things I say about stereotypes. A lot of them are true. Like
Yeah.
New Orleanians are pretty easy to figure out. Like
Yeah.
I said, we're pretty. I don't think there's any big ones to dispel these days. The big one back in the day was dispelling the whole Cajun versus Creole, like New Orleans
Uh,
versus the rest of Louisiana, because they are. But even that has become a bit more blurred as people have moved into the city and out of the city, and
mhm.
it's on the big thing about New Orleans now that is frustrating is that we keep trending more and more towards just being only tourism, which I think is
Uh,
not healthy for the city. Like it's
yeah.
becoming like a tourist trap on an island, and New Orleans is on an island because it is almost 100% surrounded by water. Like you can't even get into the city unless you drive over water.
Oh wow.
And so it can only go, it can only spread out so much, right? And so we're kind of in this tight little button area, and the alarming thing about the city is that it's just turning more and more into just a tourist city, and that kind of limits what we can do at some point,
Right.
right? Because we don't really have our own economic engine. We're totally dependent on people visiting,
Right.
and it limits our ability to grow. In my mind,
Hmm.
in New York, like it's cool if people come visit. Yeah, there's tourism dollars to be made, but there's also finance and all these other things that are driving this economic engine. Whereas New Orleans is just after Katrina, and just as time goes on, like we used to have some Fortune 500 companies, and now I think we only have one left, and so there's no just business, like day to day business happening in the city. It's all moving elsewhere to Houston or to Atlanta. Even the port is losing to Mobile, to the port of Mobile, and so it's getting kind of frustrating in that respect. And I think we and people have been freaked out because of hurricanes and stuff, and so that has hurt the city as well because we're getting a lot more than we used to. And I think I think we just need some younger and more inspired leadership to get the city moving back in the direction, because it is. I mean, and that's the thing. Last weekend, um, we had some friends in town for my girlfriend's birthday, and we were walking around the city, and I was like, it's a really cool city. It's been here for over 300 years. Like, it is a really cool place, but if we don't take care of it, it is going to turn into that stereotype that we all talk about,
Right.
right? And so then there is nothing to dispel, because it's becoming exactly what people say it is, just a place for people to come to get drunk and act like idiots. And it will do that if we don't take care of it, and we don't actually push it in another direction to get some industry back into it, and to build up our schools, and to build up our infrastructure, and make it a livable city again, because it is a really, like, especially downtown, it is a beautiful walkable city.
Yeah.
But there's no reason for people to live down there anymore. Like there's no business there.
Right.
And so more and more, like after Katrina, there was all this money coming into the city from for rebuilding from the federal government. And you know why didn't we do that? Why didn't people built all these condos, and so there's a bunch down there, and but there's nothing down there to live for. So I think for New Orleans now, if it wants to regain some footing, I think it has to put some energy into giving downtown a purpose, because it's always this thing with a lot of these major cities. Like we have the French Quarter, and yes, you can call that downtown, but the French Quarter is the French Quarter, and that's
Right.
where all the tourists go.
Right.
And then you have the CBD in the downtown area that's slowly just emptying out and becoming quieter and quieter. When it's actually a really, like, there's a lot of old architecture in there. There's a lot of beautiful old buildings, that we should be putting energy into, and revitalizing, and giving people a reason to live down there, because when you walk around down there, it is really pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. It's there's a you can see, I guess, in New York, I mean, like, just like you see sometimes where the easy money is, people kind of go to, and what you're describing with
Right.
like the tourism is like, oh, that's the easy money, so we do it. And you need something more farsighted to be like, let's develop this more, and whether that's coaxing bigger business in or something. I went to Greenville, South Carolina, and I think one of the things that was a key to, I think, their growth was like they attracted like Michelin and a few, like BMW and a few, like, I mean, that's more kind of industrial type companies that do like
Hmm.
industrial type factory work. But I think that kind of added to like the base, the corporate base. And I think what you're saying is you just need something that's you're generating something, not just kind of luring people in to spend their money, which is important to you. Obviously, restaurants need tourists, but you want to have,
Right,
I guess,
because all we need is one thing, like pandemic. We got our crime rates skyrocketed during pandemic,
yeah,
and so that killed us
yeah,
because then, and also our freaking super right wing. So New Orleans is an island of blue and a sea of red,
hmm,
and so like we had all these horrible. Um, Basically, our government put in all the crazy stuff that everyone's talking,
hmm.
restricting abortion rights and all these things, and we lost tons of medical conferences that were coming in town.
Oh
So
wow,
like medical conferences that were going to come and have, and medical conferences are like big money for restaurants like Maypop because Maypop's like tasting menu, higher end cuisine. So when we have medical conferences come in town, that stuff changes our month. Like we make a ton of money during because they're in town for like 5 days, and so we'll be packed for a week. And we had like 3 or 4 medical conferences cancel because of our backwards progressing, abortion bans and medical bans, and so that was a huge hit to us. So like if we're reliant solely on tourism, that kills us because, and once again, all that kind of happened in the last 5 years. Pandemic forced our crime to skyrocket, and then of course our super right wing government got into place and started in passing all these restrictive laws, and so like we went from having a huge convention base, and then all that convention base disappeared. We have like one of the largest convention centers in the nation, and on a busy year, it's millions of people coming to the city for conventions, and it dried up in the last 4 years, and that killed a lot of restaurants that were downtown around that convention center, which one of our restaurants is.
wow. Um, so I mean, how long were you away when you were training in Europe? How long did you live away from New Orleans?
Uh, I was 8 months in Italy, and I say a year in Italy because I went there twice. So like a year in Italy, and then I was in Germany for a year and a half.
Okay, so I mean, you had a fair amount of time away. Did you always know that you wanted to come back to New Orleans, or was there something that kind of like really
Hmm.
triggered you being away to
Or
say,
gain
you know, I
control.
really want to really?
I was not coming back to New Orleans. I was gonna. So I was in Italy for a year, and then I came back to America and was trying to find a way back to Italy. And the closest I could get was Germany, and then Germany ended up being really amazing. I was in Baden Württemberg, which is the southwestern portion, which is it's like the biggest wine growing region. The weather's the most, it's got the mildest weather. It snows in the winter, but it's really nice in the spring and the summer. And you're tucked in this little corner where Switzerland's like 45 minutes away, and France is 30 minutes away. Italy's like 6 hours away, and so it's this huge melting pot of cuisines, and and so the food there was absolutely gorgeous, and I lived in this beautiful mountain town, just surrounded by the Black Forest. It was absolutely stunning, and I was working there, and I was planning to get my way back to the Italian coast. That's where I wanted to get back to. So I'd worked in Germany for a year and a half, and I'm like, all right, man, I've had a great time here. I'm gonna start looking for my next move, because it also was like a tiny little town in the mountains. And if
Hmm.
you're from the city, you can only live in a tiny little mountain town for so long when you're 23 years old, 24 years old. I was like, man, all right, this is beautiful, but I got to get out of here. And so I was trying to find my way back down to the coast. I was talking to my old boss, and I'm like trying to get a job down there. And then Katrina hit, and of course, like my family's from here, and my mom's house got destroyed, and I'm like, okay, so I went home, and there was there was just this energy in the air after Katrina of like we need to rebuild New Orleans, and I'm like, like literally my mom's family's been here since 1750,
Oh
and so I'm
wow.
like, Yeah, so I was like, I've got to be here. I've got to rebuild New Orleans. Like, this is the thing. So, I literally took over as the chef de cuisine of Restaurant August, and then I got married. I bought a house. I had kids, and it was just this like whole, and it was like kind of what everyone was doing at that time. It was like, we have to rebuild the city, New Orleans. We can't lose this city. And so then I've been here ever since.
Hmm. It sounds like this is still a work in progress, but I mean, it could have been, if you think about what happened with Katrina. I mean, there's so much worse that could have happened. You could be 10, 15 years
Right.
on, and it could have been worse. So, one of the things that I've been trying as I don't know if this, as we get older, we think about this, but like I've become more, I guess I don't want to say patient is quite the right word, but like these things are difficult, right? Like to actually reconceive of a city, to kind of get it to be where you want to be, to shift it. It takes, it takes coaxing, and you're trying to motivate and rechannel like the ideas and thoughts and feelings of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And we don't live in a dictatorship. So like when I talk to people about the government, sometimes I feel like when people think about politics, whether you're on the left or the right, people kind of have this like
Mhm.
expectation, like, well, I elected this guy, he's supposed to do this. And I'm like, do you realize how hard it is? Like even for your restaurant, you probably have things, okay, we're going to do this. You can't just snap your finger. It always takes more time than you think.
Mhm.
So I don't know. So like what I hear about you is, it sounds like, it's almost, this is like just chapter one of the post Katrina New Orleans. It sounds like there's more to come.
Well, I mean, that's hard to say because, to be honest, so all this money was flowing into the city, and then it wasn't really, it, in true New Orleans fashion. A lot of that money didn't get used for what it was supposed to get used for.
Hmm.
And a thing is, like, I think, God, what are we? This was the 10-year anniversary. No, next year's the 10-year anniversary, I think. But no, 20-year anniversary. Next year's 20-year anniversary. It's 2005. So I think next
Yeah.
year's a 20-year. But anyway, I know, like, a lot of the money didn't get used the way it was supposed to. It was supposed to get used to rebuild infrastructure, and some of it was, and a lot of it was used to rebuild all the levee systems around the outside and all those kind of things. But I think a lot. Once again, New Orleans kind of took the money and had a party, as opposed to taking the money and building better infrastructure.
Hmm.
And so it's like, I don't honestly know. I don't know if it was used the way it should have been used.
Hmm.
And there was just a big economic boom afterwards, and that's done. Like, that
Yeah.
economic boom is over. And so now I think what it's not so much about the first act of rebuilding after Katrina. Now it's like, that's done.
Hmm.
We need to figure out what we actually want New Orleans to be now.
Right.
Like, the whole Katrina rebuilding's over with. That all that money's gone, all that energy's been spent, and so now it's like, now we kind of have to stand up on our own 2 feet, and there's no more. Nothing's coming to save us at this point, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's we kind of came off this post Katrina high of like all these people coming to support the city, all this money flowing in, and that's all gone now. And so now we actually have to grow up a little bit and figure out what we want New Orleans to be.
Hmm. Is
Does that
there
make sense?
yeah, yeah, no, totally. Yeah. Um, if is there you do refer to kind of like New Orleans being a blue and a sea of red. Are what's like, I mean, just to educate me, like New York State. I mean, New York City is probably very similar to New Orleans, just in terms of like it's kind of the focal point for the state, but there is obviously a state behind it. What is
Mm-hmm.
the rest of Louisiana like? Is there another place you could live if you were not living in New Orleans?
Well, it's like, and what I mean when I say that, and like, look, I'm a restaurant owner, and I think you'll know mostly about restaurant owners. We're like hardcore centrist, where
Yeah.
we're just like, hey, and the reason that is because, and the thing that I love about New Orleans, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here.
Yeah.
What I love about New Orleans is that we are very laissez-faire, but we accept everyone for who they are, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the greatest things. A friend of mine brought his boyfriend to New Orleans, and the boyfriend's from like tiny little town in the Bible Belt, and he's sitting there, and like his boyfriend holds his hand. He's like, "You're like," and he like jump back because like, and he's looking around, and he's like sees like men holding other men's hands in public,
Hmm.
and he's like, "You can do that here?" I'm like, "It's America, man. You can do that anywhere, right?" He's like, "No, you can't do that where I come from. Like, you can't do that in the town I come from." And I'm like, "Are you serious?" And so I get culture shock in reverse because I'm from New Orleans, where we accept everyone.
Mm.
You can be as weird as you want to be in New Orleans, which I think is the coolest shit there is.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to judge you in New Orleans. We don't judge people in New Orleans. You come here and you have a good fucking time and you live your life. And so, like, that is one thing we do have. Like, and you see it where, you know, I always say in New Orleans, you've got like four different kinds of people. You have those of us that are born here and we will
Mm-hmm.
stay here.
Mm-hmm.
They are those of us that come here for college and
Mm-hmm.
they have a really great time. And then when it's time to have kids and raise a family, they leave. Right? They only stay here from like 22 or, you know, whatever, 20 years old until about 28, maybe 30, and that's about as long as you can stay. It's about a 10-year span.
Yeah.
But if you're not totally sold, then you're gone. Like 10 years is
Mm-hmm.
about all you can hack for New Orleans. And then you have like people who have alternate lifestyles. They're the ones that
Mm-hmm.
settle here because they're accepted for what they do. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have like older couples who come retire here because they love the freedom of it and they love the fact, and like you're at that age where you're either going to be one or the other. Once you're at that age, you're gonna love the fact that everyone accepts everyone for who they are, or you're gonna go hide in a small town because that shit freaks you out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and those are sort of your four types that settle in New Orleans, so it kind of breeds on itself. And I love that about New Orleans, and I don't know where else I could go that it would be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's the hard part about New Orleans is that you could go other places, but there are few places that are as accepting as New Orleans. But
Right.
what's funny is that as soon as you leave New Orleans and you go to the smaller areas outside New Orleans, they're almost the entire opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
Lafayette's a really cool place. They're much like New Orleans. It's like a smaller version of New Orleans where it's like they're big on music, they're big on acceptance, they're big on just living life. They're really fun-loving people down in Lafayette.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go down some of those smaller towns, man, or even to like as you go north and you get closer to Arkansas, like it's not. It is the exact opposite of New Orleans.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. So what for you then is like what's a perfect off day for you in New Orleans? What would you be doing? You wake up and then what?
Well, I own restaurants. I don't really have off days.
I've given you an off day.
um, you know, sometimes, and what I forget about a lot of times is like it's cool to go be a tourist in my own city, and I forget about that a lot. I get a little curmudgeonly about New Orleans sometimes, because because certain parts of it are just sort of tourist trappy. But I will say, like this last weekend, it was my girlfriend's birthday, and some of her family came in town to surprise her, and we just went and did like a tourist day where we went down to the French Quarter and we had fun. And I'm like, you know what? That's a cool thing to do. That is really, really fun. I wouldn't do that on a typical day off because I'd want to relax.
Yeah.
So a typical day off, is usually with my kids, and it's just kind of laying low and finding some good food and maybe going to the park. I mean, we have a beautiful, like, our city. I live right by City Park, which is one of the largest municipal parks in the country, and so it's just a massive, gorgeous park with lots of cypress trees and oak trees and bayous, and it's a really beautiful place. And it's like literally 3 blocks from my house.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a big part of it. And that's the one thing, you can always find a good food here. And, and when the weather's nice, being outside. When the weather's nice in New Orleans, it's really nice. It's just that you only get it for certain parts of the year.
Uh-huh. When is that?
So the sleeper best part of the year is October.
Mm-hmm.
Like October's really, really pretty in New Orleans. November gets a little cold and rainy, and then obviously spring. Springtime in New Orleans is gorgeous, but everyone comes here for springtime because it's that nice.
Yeah. I'd say for New York, it's I think the fall is probably my favorite time of year. So you're losing all the heat, the oppression of the heat and humidity. You've got the holidays to look forward to. The crispness of the air is kind of welcome. I feel like going in the reverse, to me at least, because I'm very warm blooded. The specter of like a hot, humid summer is probably what makes the spring a little less favorable. But yeah. See, I think I was going to ask you. There was something else that you were. Is sports a big thing in New Orleans?
Well, not for me. It is a big thing. I was raised by a single mom, and so I wrestled in high school. So but you don't watch wrestling, not collegiate wrestling. It's not really, unless it's the Olympics. That's really the only time you watch it.
Yeah.
But like here we have the Saints, and when the Saints are winning, I love to go to a Saints game and watch. Like it's fun. Like Saints games are a lot of fun in the Dome because we have a really our fan base gets pretty fired up.
Hmm.
And one of my restaurants is like a block from the Superdome where the Saints play.
Oh
And
wow.
so like in the years when Breeze was doing great and we were winning a lot and we were in the playoffs every year. I mean, those were just banner years for Maypop, my restaurant downtown. We were just crushing it.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I love the energy of it. I'm not a
Yeah.
big sports fan, but I love the energy of
Yeah.
sports events. And even like I took my boys to one of the Pels games, and it was just one of these games where they just stomped the other team, and it was the energy in the room was just awesome, and it was a great time. So I'm not a sports fan. Like if you sit there and ask me like sports statistics, I literally my eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
But I love the energy of a sports game.
Yeah. And you guys have like the Super Bowl this year, so hopefully that's good for
We
business as
do.
well, right?
That's a big one for us. We're hoping that's going to kickstart New Orleans back in the right direction. I mean, since pandemic, New Orleans has been a rough spot, man. Like
Uh-huh.
we lost our entire and like I said, tourism, yes, but tourism isn't as big of an economic engine as our conventions. So
Hmm.
our convention and visitor bureau brings through just millions of people, like 40,000 person, 20,000 person conventions. And we used
Hmm.
to have like multiple, like all year long, except for the dead part of summer because that's when there's hurricanes. So people don't plan for major conventions in the summer.
Yeah.
You'll kind of get off conventions for like people who need to save money. Like you'll have smaller conventions in the summer, but the big conventions come during the nice part of the year. And it's just hundreds of thousands of people coming to the city. And we lost all that during pandemic, and we have not gotten it back yet.
All right.
So,
Well.
but they all keep saying like 2005 is the year where it's all going to come back, come flooding back. But I'm like, okay, well, yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh, we'll see. I know you've got. I know you have lots of other things to do, probably ordinarily, and certainly with the hurricane kind of approaching. So we should probably wrap up. But before we do, can I ask, like, what gives you hope at the end of the day?
Oh man, what gives me hope? Uh, you know, I am hoping. Actually, what gives me hope is I think that we will find balance eventually. Like like we're the transition from the sudden. I mean, just in the last 20 years, man, like the ramp up of the iPhone to like the onset of social media, and then and you can see how it just keeps going progressively from like Facebook, which was like sharing information, to Instagram, sharing photos, to TikTok, sharing videos. But I think that pendulum is going so extreme in one direction. I think people are getting burned out on that. They're getting burned out on overstimulation. And in the same thing, like with this younger generation, I think the one thing that I think it's been a boon to them because they can really see how actions affect others. And so I think this pendulum swings all the way to one side, and I think it's going to start to correct. And I think you're seeing that right now, where there's sort of this battle over the identity of the U.S. And I think what we're going to understand is that there will never be a collective identity for the U.S. I think everyone sort of convinced themselves that there was this thing back in the day, but I don't think there is. You can't. It's too big. It's too big to have one collective identity of what the U.S. is supposed to be. We're massive, right? That doesn't work. Um, and so I think people are going to start understanding, and hopefully understanding and settling in, and just being more accepting of other people. I mean, that's the thing. I come from a one small area in the U.S. where we are very accepting, um, and it's something that defines us. And I don't know, and I hope that other areas will start to do the same. And I think that will, you know, in a hopeful mind that lessens everyone's anxiety and xenophobia and terror of leaving what they know and their comfort zones. And I think if that's the case, then we all have a chance to sort of grow and that economy can come back. Whereas like I honestly feel like a lot of people are hiding in their shells right now. I mean, it's even like I hear it all the time. One of my restaurants is sort of out in the suburbs of New Orleans, and then one of my restaurants is down in the nitty gritty downtown New Orleans. And the people out in the suburbs are like, we don't go into the cities anymore. I hear this every day. We don't go into the city anymore. We don't like going to cities. We like staying out in our suburbs. And I'm like, oh man, like there's so many beautiful things in the city. There's a lot of scary things too, but like that's something we got to work on. and making those things not so scary. But it's like I feel like there's this sort of wrestling of people just wanting to be comfortable and resistant to change. But I also feel like the younger generation is swinging into just accepting the chaos, which is kind of how the world needs to be. The world is a lot of chaos, and we kind of have to accept that. So I'm hopeful. I'm sort of excited to see where things go in the next 10 years. I mean, there's also a bit of me that's terrified just because of hurricanes. But I think there's a lot of me that's excited to see what the next generation does, because I'm a Gen Xer. I'm already aging out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I'm excited to see what this younger generation, who is much more understanding and much more accepting and much more emotionally intelligent, of where that goes later on.
Yeah. 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 I agree 100%. Very true. So, and if anybody wants to look up your restaurants, if they're heading to New Orleans, is there one website that gives all that information, or?
There is not one. Um, probably the easiest thing to do is go to my Instagram, because I have
Uh,
all the restaurants listed on there. But we
okay.
don't have a singular website. I guess we should do that at some point.
Okay. What's
But
your
yeah,
Instagram?
it's just Michael Gulotta.
Okay. Gulotta, correct?
That's it.
For everybody out there. Okay, cool. All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for making time. I know we'd been emailing about this back and forth, and I really appreciate your being able to squeeze this in when you have
Of
so
course, and
much
sorry,
going
I
down.
was a little all over the place because my phone's like blowing up next to me with people asking questions, and so I'm sorry if I was a little distracted the whole time.
No, not at all. You didn't even notice it. So thank you. And thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you.